he is close to the brokenhearted. He binds up their wounds. God is going to lead you into the wilderness. He's going to lead you into the desert place so that you can actually be refined and purified in your faith, so that like things can be stripped off of you which were not meant to be on you, and so that you can actually walk out of the desert looking more like Jesus. At the brink of yourself, at the end of yourself, that's where he can begin. It changes everything. We posture our heart towards it. It's finished. It is paid. It's done.
Welcome to the Exposing Catholics show, where we expose the lives, interactions, and stories of Catholics. Our guest today is Ryan Bagley. Welcome on.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Dude, you are a charismatic evangelist, heart on fire for Jesus, husband, father. We went over this right before. But I want to get started on your two big encounters with Jesus.
Yeah. So I think like as we talk about two big encounters with Jesus, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my testimony. So I was born and raised in Canton, Ohio. I attended church at a really traditional old school Catholic church called St. Joseph's Canton, which is in downtown Canton. My grandpa was the deacon there, Deacon Will Bagley. He's the GOAT. He's a great man of God. But growing up in that church, it was like super traditional. So you never heard that Jesus loved you, that Jesus wanted a friendship with you, that you were loved and chosen by God. All you heard was pray, pay, and obey. Right. So I would go to church every Sunday because I thought that's what I had to do. And I'm an only child. So like growing up in that environment, for a while, actually, my parents had a falling away with the Catholic Church. So they weren't going to church at all. And I remember I really wanted to, on like one Sunday, to be a lector and a Eucharistic minister. And so I went up to the old school priest. His name was Monsignor Carfagna. He's retired now, but the guy was no nonsense, just old school, like born and raised pre-Vatican II. And I went up to him one Sunday and I was like, hey, can I lecture and Eucharistic minister? Like it was my one Sunday that I went to church. And he's like, you would have to go to church first. And I remember walking away from that experience so hurt because I was like, I really want to do this. Now, the reason I wanted to do that was not because I wanted to be like, like holy and closer to Jesus. I really just wanted to be on stage and like front and center. Because what I didn't realize at the time was like there is a gaping hole in my heart. Like that I was actually so dissatisfied that what I was craving in life at that point, even in like 7th and 8th grade, was like power and authority, because I wanted somebody to see me. And so like I actually did start going to mass like every single Sunday, just because again I wanted that title, I wanted that role of Eucharistic minister and lector. And eventually I did get it. And what I found out is that it didn't satisfy me. And so actually, one of the things that was really tough about my childhood, not just being an only child, was that I was really bullied in school from like middle school through high school. Like I felt like I had zero friends. And I felt like too that if I were to die, that no one would actually miss me. It was the lie of the enemy that I was believing, that like I had no worth, I had no value. And actually I did believe too that my only value was in the fact that I was super intelligent. Like I think I'm pretty smart, but like that was my worth. That was the place that like I was putting all my value into. And complement that with the fact that on the weekends, my parents would just go out to bars. And I understand it. Like their parents, they want to go have a date. Like, I mean, my wife and I have not been on a date in a minute and we feel it, right? So they would go out on a date and they'd leave me, basically a middle school boy, at home alone or at my grandparents', where I was just on the computer. And a middle school boy, high school boy on the computer Friday, Saturday night for hours on end is not a good place to be. And so it led me to some pretty dark places. So it was just like high school, grade school was just a very dark time for me. Segue that into college. Now, because I had been on the internet, what I believed, the lie that I was believing was that if I could just get a girlfriend, I would be fulfilled. It's kind of the lie that pornography teaches you, right? That like my fulfillment's going to become in being like having this sexual machismo or whatever it is, right? That's where my fulfillment's going to be. So I went into college like, man, I just need to find a girlfriend. And if I find a girlfriend, I'm going to be set, right? And that was a lie. But it didn't prevent me from like flirting with every single girl that I came in contact with. And so all of a sudden I began to earn this reputation in my freshman year of college that this guy is kind of weird. He's kind of pervy. He's kind of just wants to be a player, right? It's all the things that give a girl the ick about a guy. I was legitimately a walking red flag. And that kind of led me to this place where I remember on one instance, and it's actually funny because this guy who called me out at first became the best man at my wedding. So it's funny how God works. But his name is Zach Laughlin. He's a peacemaker at Walsh. And we kind of had this giant get together where his girlfriend was present at the time. And I thought she was cute. I didn't know that she had a boyfriend. And so I kept hugging her in this conversation, like kept like bursting into the bubble that I didn't realize that she had, and it made her very uncomfortable. So of course she went and told her boyfriend, as she should, and he comes over and is like, dude, you can't be doing that. And instantly, all of a sudden, like the victim mentality in me came out, and I just started crying. And I'm like, I can't believe you would say that to me, and nobody likes me. But it was like all the insecurities that I had from high school of being not loved and not seen and not wanted, kind of came to the forefront and kind of spilled out and over in that moment. And I just felt like that reputation, like I wanted that clean slate in college, but I felt like that reputation of high school and middle school had come back to haunt me. Meanwhile, in all of this is that baggage that I had from church, where it's like, you know, there is no necessarily good news, right? The good news of the gospel is actually the semi-okay news of the gospel, that you might actually get to heaven one day if you just work hard enough and you pray enough and you jangle your rosary beads enough. Like that was what I thought the good news was. So like, you know, even in my faith walk, I felt like at that point in college, I was depressed and I was 1 foot in the door and 1 foot out the door. And again, like I had no identity. And so where that culmination point of meeting Jesus was in two situations. So the first of these is I started attending. I was invited by a man who I'm still good friends with. His name's Andrew Rinaldi. He was about my age, and he was attending what I like to call a Christian bodybuilder Bible study. That's a thing, right? And it was at Starbucks. And so we'd go to Starbucks, and it was really funny because none of us would ever buy any drinks from Starbucks. So we just sit at a table at Starbucks and like go through the Bible. And there was a non-denominational group, but that was the first time I ever heard that Jesus loved me. And that Jesus wanted a friendship with me, and that the doubt and the despair and the darkness that I had been feeling was not something of God. It wasn't God punishing me. It wasn't God cursing me, but it was actually the enemy, that the enemy actually was coming to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's what he does. And it was just like a light bulb went off, like this moment of like, oh my gosh, this is actually what is going on. This is actually what's at play. And you know, that was a moment of invitation for me. But the other moment of invitation, like the moment where I really encountered Christ, is actually came through this moment where I was flirting with another girl, surprise, surprise. And it just went south, and she was just not interested. And that night I actually messaged one of my buddies, and who I perceived as a buddy. He was another person who was like just trying to get me on this right path. So I guess he was a friend. But at the time I didn't perceive him as that, right? And what ended up happening was I messaged him and I'm like, hey, why doesn't this girl like me? And he just messages back, stop objectifying women. And I'm like, what? Like that was a hard truth to hear. And so I went to the person who now I consider a spiritual father in my life, Miguel Chavez. He was the director of missional discipleship for the Diocese of Cleveland. Before that, he was the campus minister at Walsh. Now he works as the director of mission for the Sisters of Charity. So that's your plug on Miguel. And I went to him and I was like, why does nobody like me? Like, why I remember walking on this crisp fall day and just being, why do I feel so alone? Why do I feel so abandoned? Why do I feel so unloved? And he's like, well, I feel like you're going to find the answers to these questions at this retreat that we're going to have. It's called Agape, and you should come. And it was Walsh's fall retreat. So I'm like, okay, maybe I should go. And in my head and my heart, I was like, I'm going to find a girlfriend at Agape. I still wasn't letting this go. I still was not letting this go. So I go to Agape. And I remember on the first night, I was actually talking to that girl, the first girl I was flirting with at Walsh. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I get a girlfriend? Why does no girl find me attractive or anything like that? And she's like, Ryan, do you like yourself? And nobody had ever asked me that. Like, and then she like doubled down. She's like, do you love yourself? And I'm like, I guess. Like, nobody's ever asked me that. I think I love myself, right? And she challenged me. She's like, what are 3 things that you like about yourself? And I was like, I guess I like my hair. I don't know. I guess I like my teeth. I'm funny. And she's like, no, like interiorly, what are things that you genuinely like and love about yourself? And I couldn't name one. She wanted 3. I couldn't name one. And I remember that night, you know, with everything I heard from my Protestant Bible study that I was also attending, I went to bed and I prayed to the Lord and I said, Lord, I now know what the problem is. Can you fix it? And I remember the next night we had adoration, we had confession, but it was actually in the drama that they did that the Lord just like rushed in and met me. And it was this drama where Miguel was playing Jesus and people were coming to him at the lowest points in their life and like falling on their knees and saying, God, I can't do it anymore. I surrender. I give it all to you. And then Miguel, who was playing Jesus, they were all holding a candle, would actually pick them back up and light their candle and like tell them that like, you are mine and I love you. And in that moment, like I'm just like weeping and crying, and I was just like, Lord, I'm yours completely. And I just felt an embrace surround me of love that I had never felt before. Like the rush of love from the Father to the Son, like the beloved, the being adopted and grafted into Christ. Like all of that happened in that moment. And I just began to weep. And it's actually from that moment that like I encountered him and I wanted to know him. And actually my entire life from that point, just when I wanted to be a history teacher, I gave that up because I wanted to proclaim Christ with my life. Like this is my life. This is what I want to be doing. And it's hard because I feel like, you know, that old school mentality in the church is still there, where it's like, you know, very traditional and very like, there are a lot of churches still that you go to and they don't recognize that like Jesus wants a relationship. He wants a friendship with you that's both personal but also communal. Right. And so, you know, I've had my fair share of struggle in that. And I've always wanted to work for the church, and it never panned out in my younger life. And I thought it was going to be easy because they tell you this lie right from the get-go that, you know, if you go to college, you're just going to get a job right away, and then you're going to be fulfilled and you're going to be making bank. You're probably going to be driving a Mercedes Benz, and that's just not the truth. And I took this kind of this twisty turny road to get to where I am today as the director of youth ministry at Assumption. And part of that was like right out of college, I actually ended up working at a place called Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health. It was a school that was for students who had severe behavioral issues stemming from mental trauma. So you got called every name in the book that was not your own name. And that was a crazy life experience.
We've got something special for all our Catholic organizations. Now, before you skip past this part, it's not an ad. It's more like an incredible opportunity to take your digital presence to the next level. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. Something only for our podcast listeners. We, DM Productions, have a 2-day Catholic social media makeover course. It's an online course specifically made for Catholic organizations. It will take your social media to the next level. And we make it easier than ever with our step-by-step video walkthroughs, cheat sheets, customizable templates, and more. Catholic organizations, let's start creating the quality and results that secular businesses have, but with the depth and beauty of Catholicism. Oh, and did I mention the price? $700. But remember I said I was going to let you in on a little secret? Use code DMPodcast to get it completely free. No credit card required. Just pop that code in and you're all set. Head over to www.dm.productions/social media makeover or click the link in the description. Now back to the show.
But I kind of want to, if I can, because there's a part of the story before that I totally blanked on, and now I'm just remembering.
Okay. What's that clicking behind you? Is that like a?
It's this.
Is that the rosary?
That's Jesus. That's Jesus clicking. Do I need to move Jesus?
He's fine there. Maybe just scoot forward a little bit.
Let's get the bunny pillow out.
Oh,
There
yeah.
we go.
This brought to you by the bunny pillow. Yeah, so like, you know, before I even worked at child and adolescent, I actually had a job for a brief period of time as a youth minister at a parish in Uniontown, Ohio. And that just was not a good fit because I wasn't mature enough at the time to understand like what a youth minister was and what he did. I just thought I was a glorified PSR teacher that got paid. And that was great because I just worked Sundays, got paid for it, until I had this moment. Like, so like that January of my life, like kind of like everything just kind of fell apart. First and foremost, my grandma, who is one of my best friends, passed away. And at the same time, I was also dealing with a lot of like anxiety. I've always had anxiety. I actually am diagnosed with OCD, so we can get into that in a bit if we want to. But yeah, so with all of that, so my grandma passed away, and I remember I was on my way to a meeting at this church, and as I'm driving there, I'm also having a panic attack. And so I'm having a panic attack in my car driving, and I'm not even paying attention to the lights or the roads, and I end up wrecking my car. And so my grandma died, I got in a wreck, and then I remember like I fell off the face of the planet for like a month because I'm just grieving and trying to figure out what is going on. And as I am, you know, in this process, I have to actually go and have this meeting at Queen of Heaven. So it was actually one Sunday that I was going to this church to basically go to mass, and I remember I was pulled out by the priest there to have this conversation where he's like, where are you, where have you been, why aren't you doing your job? And I'm like, I don't know, because I'm so young and so wet behind the ears that I don't necessarily know what is going on. And it ends up being that this priest is like, you know, I should probably fire you because you're not doing your job, which he was in every right to do that. And I was like, I had no answer. I had no defense. And actually, the meeting ended. He didn't fire me, but I actually went to the bathroom of that church and just wept in the stall because life had just beaten me down. And it's funny because like in those moments, like where you're in the stall crying your eyes out in the bathroom, it's actually those moments where Jesus is like closest to you. Like in those moments of weeping and mourning, the Bible actually says that he is close to the brokenhearted, that like he binds up their wounds. And like in that moment in that bathroom stall, like the Lord was there. And I don't think I realized it at the time, but it was like, you know, later when I actually about a month later, I ended up quitting that job because I was like, I'm not in the right mental place. I'm not in the right state. I don't really even understand what a youth minister is. I understand now. But at the time I didn't. And I ended up like going down this really dark rabbit hole. And in a sense, I deconstructed my faith, right? I really went down this path of like deconstruction and trying to figure out what it is I actually believe, because I was so hurt in that moment. And granted, that pastor was in every right to do what he did, but I was so hurt by the church in that moment because my ministry wasn't idle. Like I saw this thing that like I actually propped the ministry, like that I'm a youth minister. I propped that up ahead like of my relationship with Jesus. I wanted that more than I wanted him. And when I lost it, I felt like I lost everything. And so I went down this path of like deconstruction where I was like, I remember like before that season of life happened, I was in my car and I was driving. And I remember thinking to myself, like, my faith is secure. I don't have to ask any questions. Like, I'm good. And it's funny that I feel like the Holy Spirit was prompting that because of the path he led me on, right? Where now I'm questioning everything and I'm questioning the very basis of what I believe. it's being refined. And actually it was funny because I remember like walking down this lonely road, and this is, I guess, the second moment of encounter that, just in the context of this conversation, I mean, there's so many moments of encounter, but this one just stood out to me as like kind of a launching point in my journey. I remember I was at Walsh University and I was getting coffee with a buddy of mine. His name's Curtis. And I was in this broken place and I had nobody to talk to. And I remember opening up to him and I'm like, bro, I don't know where God is. Like, I don't feel him. I don't see him. Like, it's dark. And he was like, he led me in scripture to the Gospel of Mark, where it says the Spirit drove Jesus out into the wilderness. And he actually showed me in that scripture that sometimes God is going to lead you into the wilderness. He's going to lead you into the desert place so that you can actually be refined and purified in your faith, so that like things can be stripped off of you, which were not meant to be on you. And so that you can actually walk out of the desert, like looking more like Jesus. And like, I think that was kind of a turning point of, you know, how do I view these seasons of despair? How do I view these seasons of, you know, we have consolation, but we also have desolation. So how do I view these seasons where I feel so desolate and alone and abandoned? It's actually not that God is abandoning me. It's actually in the sense that he's launching me into this place where I can encounter him more deeply through the purification of my faith. So yeah, there's a lot there.
There is. Do you have anything to say about that?
I don't know, there's a lot to process.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really cool that you're able to have all of the desolate times and everything like that, and you're like, where do I go? And like the first place you turn is like God.
Yeah.
And obviously that wasn't your first instinct, but then to be able to get there is just really, really beautiful that you can explain that, and especially to the youth that like you're able to do that.
And I think that's a super important thing, because like a lot of people think like youth are falling away from the church, but that's not the reality at all. Actually, what we see with our youth is that they actually crave and long for something real. And if I, as a person, am just going through the motions of my mother's faith, as in a faith that's not actually mine, but it's just my mother's, like that's so hollow to them. They want something that's real, that goes through those tough moments, that goes through loss and pain and heartache and anxiety, and like gives them promise and hope that you are going to get through this to the other side. It's kind of what Romans 5:3 says, that we rejoice when we suffer, because we know that suffering will produce endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope doesn't disappoint. It's the hope of that testimony that you're going to get through this. You're going to get to the other side, because God is faithful. And if he begins something in your life, he's faithful to complete it.
Why do you have to go through the desert? Like, why do you have to deconstruct like that?
Yeah, well, so like Jesus, I mean, makes it. So this is actually a very interesting thing, because we live in a culture that is very pain avoidant. Like, we just want it easy. We want it fast. It's the McDonald's fast food culture, man. Like, if I sit in a McDonald's drive-through line for more than 5 minutes, man, I'm ticked, because I want my Mickey D's fresh, hot, with a little extra salt on the French fries. Like, that's the culture we were raised in. And it's very utilitarian, where it's, you know, pleasure seeking, pain avoidant. But the gospel is so countercultural, because Jesus actually says in the gospels that if you want to follow me, you need to pick up your cross and deny yourself. And so the picking up of the cross is that level of self-denial. The reason we need to go through the desert is because by our very nature, we are somewhat selfish. We like to think interiorly about ourselves and like not about the other. And so like in those seasons of the desert, the Lord actually brings you to the brink of yourself, because at the brink of yourself, at the end of yourself, that's where he can begin. And so like those moments, like it's actually interesting. I think of like crying, like tears. Like there's a guy by the name of Corey Russell who's part of a church in Dallas called Upper Room, and he calls crying the gift of tears, because when you cry, it's actually where God is beginning. It's prayer beyond words, he says. And like, that's really what the desert place brings you to, is a point where it's all God. What's interesting is, like, in the early church, there were individuals who were so fed up with culture, like church fathers who were so fed up with culture, that they actually intentionally chose to go into the desert. They become known as the desert fathers, the most famous of which is Anthony of Egypt, who I think at one point just literally rose himself from the dead or something along those lines. Don't quote me on that. But like, these guys, they literally were so tired of culture that they went out into the desert so that they can have a more pure reality of just Jesus and only him. Right. And so like, the desert place is so important for all of us, right? Because if we don't go through it, if we don't go through the fire, there's no maturation in our faith. And the Lord is after a faith which is not just simple and trusting, but also mature and well-rounded. It's how we become wounded healers, in a sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the one quote that you said, that the tears are
liquid prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was telling you about what happened last night. Like, I was scrolling, obviously, on TikTok in the bathtub, and this video came up, and it was this one girl, and she's like, this is the text on the screen said, the first time I talked to my sister at her grave. Yeah. And it was like really, really emotional, and like, it really hit me because my brother passed away like a year ago. Yeah. And I just started crying, and I was like, wow, like, I don't have words to like explain what I'm feeling, but like, I did feel like the emotions that were coming out and the tears that were like, that I was crying were like, God, you know what this is. And I definitely felt that, but I've never heard it like that. That is so true.
And it speaks to Romans 8, where it says we ought not know what to pray sometimes. Like, sometimes we just don't know what to pray, and actually when we don't know what to pray, it's the Spirit who intercedes on our behalf with groanings beyond understanding. And like, that's really what tears are. It's that groaning beyond understanding. It's that, I don't even know what to pray in this season. But even like, and it could just not, it's not just a momentary thing. Sometimes there are seasons in life where you don't know what to pray, and the Spirit is the one praying. And sometimes you don't even think to pray, like, you're just like so far away, but the Spirit who dwells in you is actually interceding on your behalf constantly to the Father. Like, this is what my child needs, this is what my daughter needs, this is what my son needs. It's actually interesting because like, I'm a dad now, and my daughter Marielle, she's 16 months old, and she's in that phase of toddlerdom where she doesn't know all the words to say what she needs, but she knows like, she just makes these grunting noises sometimes, and they're like whiny grunts. And it's like, whenever she does that, I'm like, okay, do you want a bottle, do you want this, do you want that? And it's like, I'm working on her behalf to figure out a solution to what she's feeling, right? And I think the Spirit, in a real way, it's that, but it's more refined, because the Spirit actually knows what you need, as opposed to me as a dad who I'm just pulling at straws, right? It's a beautiful image.
There was a picture on Pinterest, or just on the internet, I guess, and it was, Dear God, it was somebody writing a note, and then it didn't have any words, but it had like somebody crying, like tears on the page. You could see the little tears that fell, and then it just at the bottom said amen. And that was it. And I felt that.
Undoing is prayer. Right? We need to be undone, because sometimes we hold on too tightly. And so like, the desert place is that place of undoing. It's the place where God meets us in the midst of our brokenness, where we're like sitting like a child, like before a toy that's broken, and we're like, I don't know how to fix this. And God's like, I know, but I do. And so it's like trusting in him that he knows how to fix it, even when we don't know, even when we don't have the words, even when we don't have the defense to give, right? It's beautiful. And this is where we meet Jesus, not just in like, so he's the good, he's the true, and he's the beautiful. But that's actually the place where we meet him in the beauty. It's actually, the beauty is in that place of depth, of brokenness, of the Lord's actually stretching you to encounter the more of him.
Do you think it's just a constant cycle?
Absolutely.
I feel like
absolutely.
It's like, wow, the first half of my life was just like, it's just like, this is just how stuff goes.
Yeah.
And then like, whoa,
yeah,
you're really challenged here.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't know any of this
before. So it's not just a cycle, it is the cycle. It's the Paschal mystery. So Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. And actually the beauty of our faith is that our faith is an invitation into that mystery where we die and rise with Christ. And so like Rob Bell has this great quote where he says that death is the engine of life. And like there's like with death, like with all of this, with suffering, there's such a deep mystery to enter into. And actually it's funny, I just learned from a homily by Father Pat Schultz this last Sunday that the word mystery comes from a root in Greek that literally means to shut one's mouth. And so I love that because like when it comes to suffering, when it comes to these places of being deconstructed, these desert places of our faith, it's actually not a moment where we can talk. It's actually a moment where we're actually called to like shut our mouth and join in this invitation to go deeper with the Lord, where we die to ourselves and then we rise with him. And as we die and as we rise, the Lord allows all of this with the promise of something that we call in theology, I love this word, theosis, where he makes us more and more like him, so that when people see me, they actually see Jesus. And when they hear my words, they see, or when they hear my words, they hear him speak. When they look into my eyes, they see his beauty. Like that's the end goal. And it's a continual stripping off of these things that just don't reflect him, so that we can reflect him.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think what I've been going through is that it was kind of like a distant faith, and then like diving all in, because I'm like an all-in type of person. And so like participating in mass, really trying to understand, getting deeper and deeper, and then feeling like, okay, like doing some good stuff here, and feel like I know a decent amount, and then now it's like that slap in the face. Okay, start heading back. Like you've learned that part, and now you got to go through the desert again, because it needs to be deeper, and you not only have to like participate in it, now I need to understand.
Well, and I think too, like to clarify what you said, you're like, I'm doing good things, and it's like, actually, and this is maybe where the Lord's slapping you in the face, it's not about doing, it's about receiving, right? Because if you're a son and he's a good father, you don't have to do anything to win his approval. That's an orphan mentality. Like an orphan, or somebody who has like a narcissist as a father, is trying to like win his approval and be like, Daddy, look how good I am. Dad, look how good I am. Dad, look how good I am. But he already sees you and he calls you enough. And so like what I feel like what the Lord is probably doing for you in this season is teaching you how to abide in him. And like, just let that be okay. Like you don't have to try so hard. And so like that's actually, I'm like ministering to you, and I know, right? This is what the Lord does though. Like you don't actually have to try so hard to receive his love. And so like sometimes he just has to uncurl our fists, because we're like, Lord, I want to hold on, I want to do this for you, I want to do that for you, and we find our worth in our doing. But actually it's our worth in our being as son or daughter, and that's actually where our doing flows from. So it's actually like our doing and our being are like irrevocably tied together, but we have to put them in proper perspective, that our doing comes from our being. Like everything we do, even this podcast, has to be a place of overflow from this secret place where we get to spend time with Dad, and Dad loves us. And that's enough.
Yeah, you needed to hear that.
Hey.
We all need to hear
it. I did too.
I'm preaching to myself here. Like that's the glory of God. Like this is a truth that I'm learning every single day.
Must be that middle child mentality.
Yeah, definitely that.
So how do we live a such a faith-filled life that's not dependent upon doing anything but receiving.
It's all in how we posture our hearts. Are you posturing your heart with the world, or are you posturing your heart with Christ? And so, like, you know, just like how you sit, like it's an outward reality that reflects an inward reality. So if I'm like sitting like this in the midst of this podcast, you're going to know that like I don't clearly care to be here, but I hope you see from my body language that I'm having the time of my life.
The energy, the body movement,
just being here, like, is a joy. Being able to talk about Jesus is a joy. And so, like, you know, it reflects my inward heart mentality. And so how do you posture your life? How do you posture your secret place time? And it all goes back to like, am I praying to check a box? Am I praying did I do my morning office or my rosary to check a box, or did I do it to commune with the maker of the universe, the one who breathes and stars come into existence, this God who formed me in the womb, who wants to be my dad and my friend? Did I do it because I wanted to talk to him today? Because sometimes he just likes to hear my voice. Like, is actually a reality that like I'm learning more and more as a dad. And I think like for you, it does sink more when you have kids. So like there's a truth in that. Like you're going to go deeper into that reality when you guys have a family, of like, you don't learn what it means to be a son until you're a father. And it's funny because my daughter's learning how to talk, and just hearing her say words, like she learned like this week how to say up. And it's the cutest thing, because like she has a car and I said up, and then she took the car and placed it on the stones of her house and was driving it up, and then she goes up, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. And like I feel like that's how the Father sees us, is just like we're sitting here having this podcast talking about him, and he's like, yeah, those are my kids. Like that's my boy, that's my girl, right? Like I love them. And that's how he sees us. But like, we got to get out of this orphan mentality of like, I need to do to receive. Like, because the reality is that we already are. We have our adoption in Christ, through his finished work on the cross. And if we just rest in that, the finished work, like it changes everything. We posture our heart towards it. It's finished. It is paid. It's done. Like, it changes everything. It's interesting, the word it is finished, which Jesus says on the cross. In Greek, that word is tetelestai. And tetelestai was actually a financial term that you'd write at the bottom of a ledger when a debt was paid. So you'd actually say this debt is paid. And so oftentimes our places of like doing, like radical doing, where like, oh my gosh, look at this, look at this project I have, look at this job I'm doing, look at me meeting quotas. It's all based on this debt that we feel. Like this debt that we feel towards society, this debt that we feel towards others, to be like, look at how good I am, look at how productive I am, look at what I have in my bank account, because that's what matters. And the reality is, if we go back to the words of Jesus on the cross in the Gospel of John, it's finished. It's done. You're worthy. You will never not be worthy. You're always worthy.
Yeah, and I think this like society views the this like go mentality and like, always get stuff done, and the you know, like that there's like two parts. There's like the super lazy, just do nothing type of people, or like the other extreme. Always self-improvement, always this, always that. And so I feel like I definitely see the parallel of when you're talking about just praying to check the box, because I was going through a program like that helps, they train people to get out of watching porn. And so that was one of the things, is like, wow, I'm doing all these things. And I'm talking to my coach, and he's like, dude, you're just checking the boxes. And so then that was the turning point of, okay, how do you not just check the boxes? How do you actually change something in your heart? How are you really striving to invite Jesus there? Instead of just like checking it one at a time.
Well, and that's where you let him be Jehovah Rapha, the Lord our healer. Like the word Rapha in Hebrew is healer. And so it's like a title of like prayer of like, you know, God, you are Jehovah Rapha. Like, Dad, you're Jehovah Rapha. And like that's so important that we see God as our healer. And like when we go to the secret place to be with him, whether it's in the morning or the evening, it's like, Lord, what do I need healing? Where do I need healing? Why do I need healing? And letting the Lord like lead you into those places so that he can heal you, whether that's a physical healing or whether that is, you know, a mental or spiritual healing, right? Like the Lord actually wants to heal you. And that's actually a benefit of the desert place as well, is like you learn like in the desert place where your weaknesses are, where your blind spots are, where all these areas of hurt and pain and trauma are. And then you can allow the Lord to minister to them. I think of Ezekiel, Elijah, who in the scriptures, you know, he's running from Ahab and Jezebel because he basically told them that God is out for them. And so he's running from them and the prophets of Baal, and he's in the desert, and he goes and he rests underneath a broom tree. And, you know, I love this scene because desert, broom tree, Elijah's in his feelings. He's basically saying, God, kill me. Life sucks. This is hard. He literally tells God to kill him. And God does what any good father would do. He goes, no, you just need a nap. And he puts Elijah into a deep sleep. And then when Elijah wakes up, there's a raven who comes and gives him bread. And I love that story because it, number one, involves a desert place, but then it just speaks to the simplicity and the sanctity of the small moments of our life, because all Elijah actually needed in that moment was a nap and a snack. Like there's actually a holiness to a nap and a snack sometimes. And this is where we get into like this concept that is so important in scripture of like Sabbath. Right. So you talked about how there's two cultures of like just being lazy and sitting on your parents' couch and playing Fortnite all day. And then there's like this hustler culture of if you're not driving 4 Lamborghinis at 25, what are you doing with your life? You should probably buy my course so I can teach you how to drive 4 Lamborghinis. Except I totally got those 4 Lamborghinis by selling you this course. Right. That's the only way I got those Lambos. Like you have those two mentalities, but Jesus oftentimes comes to give us a middle way. And the middle way here is Sabbath, where it's we rest and we recharge and we put down so that we can be with Jesus because we recognize him as primary in our life. And after filling our tank with him, then we can go out and we can function and overflow when we are in society. And so like everything we do then becomes a function of that overflow with the Lord.
Why does everything lead back to God? We were talking about this before.
Man, because he's Alpha and Omega. He's the beginning and end. Like it's in him that we live, move, and have our being. And it's actually in him that like he sustains everything. If like it's actually a theological truth that if God were to ever stop thinking about you because he is being itself, you would cease to exist. I'm gonna say that again. It didn't blow your mind enough.
I'm like
because
stunned.
If God ever stopped thinking of you, you would cease to exist. And I love that because there are moments where I mess up. There are moments where I feel like I'm in sin. There are moments where I feel so distant from him, and I'm like, he's still thinking about me. I'm still here. That's amazing, because I would have given up on me long ago, and God never gave up on me. Like I'm still here. I'm still breathing. I still have purpose. Even in those seasons where I'm running far from him, like he still thinks of me. And he doesn't just think of me. He's constantly, never ceasingly thinking about me. That's profound.
Yeah, that does blow your mind.
Yeah. He stopped thinking about you. Poof.
Yeah.
You better stop thinking about me then too if that happens to you.
Like it's that's the truth, is like God, we are created from love and for love. Like the beauty of like the Trinity and like the idea of God being 3 persons is that within the Trinity there's self-sufficiency. Like there's a circle dance of love between Father, Son, and Spirit. But that love was so, and that love between Father, Son, and Spirit was sufficient to stay between Father, Son, and Spirit. But that love chose to go outward and create you and I and everything we see around us. Like everything from God's heart is an overflow of love. we are an overflow of love. And then we are called to be co-creators in that overflow of love and create more love through the way that we exist. Like even the family unit is just that overflow of love. It's the love of husband and wife that leads to a beautiful little daughter or a beautiful little son. Like that's the overflow of love from the Father.
What are some of the things you deconstructed? Like what were some of the topics?
Left turn. So like and I think it's like one of these things with like deconstruction. So like deconstruction gets this bad rap in the church. And obviously I've reconstructed since, so it's not just like I stayed in deconstruction. I think that's where the bad rap comes from, because like there are people who like let's back it up a little bit. So when I talk about deconstruction, what I'm referring to is this process through which like people like myself have been hurt. I mean, we all have been hurt. And I think my grandpa has this quote where he says, you know, nobody hurts you like the church. And I think that's so true, because the church is actually a hospital for sinners. It's not a museum for saints. And the reality is that oftentimes though the church tries to act like a museum of saints, when in reality it's not. It's still a hospital of sinners. And so there are people like hurt people, right? People who are hurting hurt other people. And oftentimes when that happens, if people have a negative reaction to the people, the bride of Christ who's supposed to represent Christ, sometimes they walk away from everything. They throw the baby out with the bathwater. Actually, to give a good story, my daughter, one of her favorite pastimes right now is to put bottle caps on bottles. And so like I will usually have a glass or a bottle of San Pellegrino at night because I love the taste of TV static. And so I will have, you know, my bottle of San Pelli, and she'll want to put the cap on the San Pellegrino, but sometimes she can't get it and she gets frustrated. And when she gets frustrated, she takes the bottle and she'll smack the bottle and like then start crying. And I think that's oftentimes what some people do when they deconstruct, right? Where they go down this path where nothing makes sense because of the hurt, because of the chaos, because of the trauma. And they pull apart their faith. They start questioning things. They start wondering why things are working the way that they're working. And then they just leave it on the floor, like a kid who can't figure out a puzzle. And they just leave the puzzle pieces to never put them together again. Now, granted, I think a lot of deconstruction is a very emotional process. And so like oftentimes when I was deconstructing, my goal wasn't reconstruction. My goal was just to try to come to some sense of what I had experienced, what pain I had gone through, how the church had hurt me. And that wasn't like, that deconstruction period was like 3 solid years of like, I'll be honest, I even stopped going to church for some of those, that period of time, because I was so hurt. I was so in pain. And oftentimes I felt like, you know, there are questions that manifested themselves, like, for example, the free will debate. I remember like thinking, one day, like as I had that conversation in the car with God, where I'm like, I don't ever need to question my faith. My faith is solid. One day I was like, you know, free will, everybody just believes free will exists. It just does, right? And then I Googled it. And then I found out most atheists and materialists don't believe in free will. And that just wrecked me for a solid like year. Because I couldn't figure out the free will dilemma and debate. And so I read so much theology and philosophy on the mind. Now, at the heart of that question, beyond just the free will debate, which I'm sure we'll get into here in a sec because it's fascinating, is actually like, there was actually an emotional question. So one of the things that I haven't discussed yet is I actually have, I think I may have mentioned it briefly, is I have obsessive compulsive disorder. I was diagnosed by a secular psychologist. I actually went to a Christian therapist and psychologist, which was, hot take, the dumbest decision I've ever done, because all he told me, like, I'm like, my mind is messed up and I can't stop thinking. Like with OCD, by the way, just to clarify, it's not like what the culture thinks about with OCD, where it's like I wash my hands compulsively, or that I'm super organized all the time. I wish it were that. My wife also wishes OCD was that. It is not that. It's really like where thoughts stick in your brain and you can't get rid of them. And so sometimes those thoughts, make sense. Sometimes they don't. So like one of the early ways my OCD manifested, actually, I remember at age 6, I was counting the amount of snacks I had in a day, because I thought if I had more than 6 snacks, I would throw up. And so like there's a rationality to it. Like it doesn't necessarily make sense. And so I'd be really anxious if I ate a 7th snack. Like it would just slip my mind and I just popped that 7th Pop-Tart in my mouth or whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to puke. So at some point today. And it usually never happened. So there's that. But like as I got older, like it took on a myriad of different forms, where like I'd be driving on the highway and I'd like get this mental image of my car swerving off the road, which is a very traumatic image as you're driving 70 miles per hour on the highway. And so like there would be a lot of anxiety that would well up in me. And the reason why I say that Christian therapist was the worst mistake of my life, or one of the worst mistakes, is he basically told me, as I told him all of this, he told me basically, you don't trust God. That's your issue. You don't trust God. And I'm like, I'm sure I actually do trust God. Like I work in ministry. This is my life. I obviously, we can always grow in our trust of God, but I trust God a lot. And it was funny because, you know, that funny enough, the Lord actually led me away from him because I had to reschedule on one event. And I called him and like, hey, what time works to reschedule? And he never called me back. So that kind of worked out. So I found another psychologist who was like, yeah, you have a brain chemistry issue. And I'm like, oh yeah, those do exist. And he's like, one take OCD. So the reason I bring that up is with this free will debate, like which took the forefront of my deconstruction for the longest time. Like my OCD made that repeat in my brain over and over again. And what OCD oftentimes does is like with OCD, and it can take on a religious flavor, which mine definitely did. And like the religious flavor of OCD is twofold. So it's like the questions of the apologetics and like the diving deeper into that. But it could also be scrupulosity. Which, are you guys familiar with that?
No. What is
so scrupulosity is a hypersensitivity to sin. Bless you.
Thank you.
The patron saint of scrupulosity, who does exist, is Saint Alfonso Liguori, who's also the patron saint of confessors. And he actually has like a list of like things for like people who are scrupulous, because it's always been like an issue in the church where there are people who are just hypersensitive to sin, or hypersensitive to their actions in a way that they always perceive sin in their actions. And so like I went to confession once upon a time because I almost killed a fly. Yeah, I almost killed a fly. So I went to confession because I was like, oh my gosh, is almost killing a fly a mortal sin? Oh my gosh. I remember one other time I went to confession. I would go into confession weeping too. I'd be like, the father probably thought I murdered 3 people. And he was like, you know, I went in and I was like, he's like, what'd you do? What's wrong? I'm like, I almost killed a fly. I also went to confession one time because I was thinking about LeBron James and how he does all those hand signs beforehand, and I was like did one in my car, and I was like, oh no, what if that's actually a symbol for the Illuminati? And because the Illuminati is actually satanic, did I blaspheme the Holy Spirit? And if I blaspheme the Holy Spirit, that's the unforgivable sin in the Bible, so God is never going to accept me into heaven. And so I actually went to confession for that sin, not once but twice, because I was that torn up about it. So that's like the scrupulosity element, but the apologetics element is like, I would take this free will argument question and I would dissect it every single way to get some form of certainty as to what the answer could be. And what I found, and this is my issue with a lot of apologetics, is like this conversation with whether it's on the atheistic side or the theistic side, is it never really touches bottom. And what I mean by that is at some point you have to take a leap, whether that's a leap into belief or if that's a leap into unbelief. Like you're never actually going to get, I mean, there is certainty. I mean, there's some degree of certainty that we can prove from the natural law and order that God does exist. That is true. And that's what the church fathers along with Aquinas taught. But to some degree too, you're never this side of reality going to have that certainty.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's actually an interesting thing to me that the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. It's deep.
That's crazy.
The opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. Because think about it. When you're in heaven, you're seeing God face to face. You're certain he exists. Therefore, you don't need faith. So the opposite of faith is certainty. And that's fascinating. This is why, like you look in scripture and you see someone like Peter who's called to walk on the water with Jesus. That's why it's a moment of faith, because in that moment, when Peter steps out, he isn't certain if he's going to float, if he's going to walk on water, if he's going to sink. He's not certain. He has to take that leap into, I trust you, Jesus. Mm-hmm. So that's why the opposite of faith is certainty. It's such a fascinating thing. That was such a freeing thing for me to learn, because I had to be certain in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's where atheists are just people trying to argue against the faith, whether if they believe in a higher power or not. Mm-hmm. Like, that was always my hang up when I would tell you about it. It's like, why do these people need to always have some sort of scientific or repeatable way to prove that God exists?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it at the end of the day is if they want to admit it, if they don't want to admit it, it's church hurt, it's trauma, it's things like that of that nature. I oftentimes find that the intellectual roots of atheism are actually the emotional roots of atheism, or they're just hubris. It's just pride of oh, well, I can figure this out. It's that inability to dive into mystery, because to dive into mystery is to shut one's mouth. Right. So if oftentimes I know it sounds funny, but yeah, because to dive into mystery, you have to shut your mouth. And I think, but that goes for both sides of the spectrum, right? So for example, as Christians, sometimes we go on the offensive with those individuals when the reality is those individuals just need love. Mm-hmm. And they don't need someone to give them a three treatise defense on why God exists or why God allows suffering. They just need someone who's going to sit down and have a glass of bourbon with them and enjoy life. They just need someone who's going to listen. They just need someone who's going to care for them. They just need someone who's actually willing to be the hands, the feet, the presence of Jesus Christ, not necessarily here's the beauty of Jesus. Jesus is God. God doesn't need defended. He's kind of omnipotent, right? He's all powerful. And oftentimes we as Christians, we go on the defense or we go on the attack, when the reality is we should just love. And if we love, our love has the fragrant aroma of heaven, which it's his kindness. Here's the beauty of Jesus. It's his kindness that leads us to repentance. It's not the logical ability of our arguments that leads people to repentance. It's his kindness. And that kindness, the word kindness comes from the Greek metanoia, which means a change of mind or a change of heart. It's a full coming to terms with this is who Jesus actually is. And oftentimes it's a migration from head to heart. And so those conversations with atheists, are they good? I mean, they can be. They can lead to a deeper understanding and a deepening of oh, there are rationally intelligent Christians who really, know what they believe and why they believe it. But at the end of the day, there has to be something more. That conversation does bottom out at a certain point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe that's where I'm going, and kind of I'm trying to navigate this thing of wanting to have so much knowledge to be able to hold on, I don't want to say the wrong things, so I'm not going to say really anything at all, and I choose the path of okay, I'll listen, I'll hear you, and then I'll go do a bunch of research on it and see if I could try to figure it out.
Well, that's St. Francis of Assisi, and the prayer, his prayer, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. He says, seek not to be understood, but to understand. And oftentimes we as Christians, we do the opposite. We're oh no, this is God. We're we need to make God understood. We need to blah, blah, blah. And it's that just drives people away.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If we just love the way Jesus loves. I mean, now granted, that doesn't mean we compromise truth. Truth is still truth, and we have to uphold it.
Absolutely.
But it's the love of Jesus. Moreover, like it's the goodness and the truth and the beauty of Jesus combined that lead people to the repentance that they need.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I joined the Word on Fire thing to start watching apologetic videos.
Yeah.
Trying to like figure out all these different things so that I have some sort of, I don't know, like some ammunition on it to be able to pop off.
Yeah.
When it comes to defending the faith, which I think is good, but I think it's what's being revealed is that it's a lack of trusting in him being able to work through my not understanding.
Yes. And like sometimes it's that not understanding that's more humbling than the understanding, because like when we understand, like we just want to go on like I've had so many debates with atheists where I walk away just hurt and angry because I'm like I couldn't topple this one argument, right? Like, you know, there's I see those articles on like the bottom of news things that are like doctors hate this one trick, and it's like Christians hate this one trick, right? No, but it's like whatever it is, like I would walk away from those arguments like hurt and confused and angry. And it's just like, and even the free will argument, like I would like get to the end of this and be like, well, at some point, like I have to make this leap. I would.
Did you dive both ways? Like, did you try to argue all the different ways?
Of course. I tried to argue all the different ways, and I tried to come up with like, you know, if like we call them logical syllogisms in philosophy, which is just such a fascinating and fun word, syllogism. But
what is that?
It's like, so if you have like, statement, like it would be basically like if this is true and this is true, then this is true. So it's like a logical statement. So if P1 is true and then P2 is true, then this is the truth that you get at the end. And so I'd go through those. I literally used to work as the dishwasher of a coffee shop, and I always wanted to be a barista, and maybe this is why they didn't make me a barista, because I was sitting in the back arguing philosophy in my brain as I washed dishes half-heartedly. But I'd go through all these arguments and I'd try to figure it out, and at the end of the day I would just make my head hurt because I was so wanting to have answers. And obviously I think like there is a rationality to our faith. I obviously think that like there is a philosophical underpinning to everything that we believe and a scientific underpinning to everything we believe. But at the end of the day, again, like there has to be an element of faith, because it's that element of faith that takes the natural to the supernatural.
Yeah.
Like, and if we just believe, like we have to at some point believe in that which is supernatural. And that's where like we believe in revelation. Like there are certain things that we can ascertain from God, from reality, from the natural law, but then there's certain things that like have to be revealed to us through the Son, who is the image of the Father.
The idea of this free will thing doesn't even make any sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, so the whole free will debate, so like this is where it started for me. So like it's actually interesting because like obviously like free will seems so apparent to like most theists or even a lot of atheists, right? I always love when atheists are like, oh, Christians are how could they be so dumb to believe that? And I'm like, well, if we take your worldview to the logical conclusion, the logical end, then I had no choice in believing it. Because it wasn't my choice, it was my brain's choice. My brain is just a supercomputer. And so like at the end of the day, like most atheists don't even follow that worldview to like its implicit end of like, well, if like your worldview is true, then these guys really aren't idiots. They're just believing what the brain told them to believe. And you actually aren't enlightened then either. You're just believing what your brain taught you to believe. So like the whole argument goes, so, and this is kind of the basic argument, that as Christians, we believe in the soul. Now, the soul isn't this wispy thing in the center of our chest that's kind of like pulling the strings behind the scenes. That's actually a Cartesian idea. Are you guys familiar with Descartes? So Descartes was a philosopher from the 18th century whose famous line was, "I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum." And what that really means is like, oh, he was like trying to question everything and go back to like, what can I prove is real? And what he proved was real is that I am a reg cogitans, a thinking thing. So I'm a thinking thing. I can think for myself, right? Therefore, there has to be some substance in me that's producing that thought. And he kind of had this Cartesian idea of the soul, which is kind of like this wispy thing that's just chilling in the middle of your chest, and when you die, like that wispy thing, you get your little ghost tail and you go to heaven, right? But the reality is actually much deeper than that. So we as Catholics, and I would say most like Orthodox Christians who understand philosophy, we hold the hylomorphism, which is that the soul is the form of the body. So the soul and the body are actually not just two things, right? Descartes would say they're like two substances, right? There's body and then there's soul. And this is actually where you get a lot of heresy, because this is where you kind of get the idea that, oh, body bad, soul good, right? But that's not the case. We as Catholics, we believe that the body and the soul make up a composite, that they can't be easily torn from one another. That's why death is such an aberration, because it is a tearing of the composite of body and soul. Like the form of the body is ripped from it. So like they're one thing.
So it's like the Trinity, basically. It's like they're like one thing but two, but not, okay. You know what, that sounded dumb.
No.
Not in like the God, in a God sense, but in like they're
one and the same.
Yeah, no. Oh, okay, yeah. Maybe
so the soul is the form of the body, and what we believe with that. So like, let me dive a little deeper. Is that within the soul we have both an intellect and a will, and these are kind of like the supernatural elements of the soul, because they can't be bound to anything natural. Like your free will can't be bound to anything that's natural, because if it's just natural systems, it's just instinct and drive and things like that. So the soul has to be something that's put in and breathed in from the top down. The intellect and the will have to be breathed into us, right? That's actually what in some sense it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. Is to have these capacities to know and to choose God. So your intellect allows you to know God. It allows you to understand things that are like at a supernatural or a formal level, right? So like you can't teach a dog algebra like you can teach a human being algebra, because they have this idea of intellect. In the same way, like, so your intellect allows you to know God. Your ability to have free will allows you to choose God, right? That's the basic understanding of this. And they come from the top down. So they're like top down. They're imparted upon us, and then we as a whole being make that decision. We can't just say, oh, I'm sorry. Like it won't work in the court of law if you say, well, my brain made me kill that person, because like that doesn't make sense. From a materialistic view, though, there is no top-down reality. There's only bottom-up. So think about it like this. If we build from the bottom up, at the most basic level, you have atoms. And those atoms are kind of clinging into each other, and those atoms form, gosh, I'm terrible at science, but those atoms form even bigger compounds. Those compounds form more things. And at some level, you have these systems which, even in the body, like organize themselves into organs, and then organ systems, and then like cells and things like of that nature. And so it's all from the bottom up, right? Because there's nothing from the top down that organizes it.
Right.
There's nothing from the top down that organizes it. There's no soul that's imbued in them. It's just systems. So at the end of the day, what you are at the most basic fundamental level is just atoms banging into each other. And so at the most basic fundamental level, like even concepts such as truth, like they don't necessarily, there's no metaphysical value to them. Right. So we can't say, oh, this is truth. This is why atheists cling to like a relativistic morality, because like you can't say, oh, well, this is good, because what's goodness? If all we are is just atoms, goodness doesn't actually exist. It's just a human construct. Or this is truth. Well, this is why like gender identity is such a huge issue today, because we can't even say what's male and female, because we don't have even a like it all goes back to like this like everything becomes relative, because at the end of the day there is no truth. We're just atoms. And like those atoms build upon each other. So at the end of the day, like even in your brain, all your thoughts are just neurons and atoms clinging into one another. All you are is just these atoms that are bouncing into one another. And your conscious experience then is kind of like the computer screen to a computer that is just like a hard drive and all those like electrical currents going through that thing. That's all your conscious experience is. It's just like like, you know, as I told you guys earlier, there's a guy by the name of Thomas Huxley who talks about your consciousness being just the smoke that comes off of a train engine from burning coal. Mm-hmm. Like, that's all your conscious experience is. And that's a very bleak outlook, because it gives you zero control over anything. Like, your sense of control, and even more so your sense of like thought and logic, it's all an illusion. Right. And so this is where like an atheist like Sam Harris, who wrote a book called The Lament of the Marionette, like, he talks about how like your idea of free will is just an illusion, right? Like, everything is just like, it doesn't actually exist. And even at best, like, there are other atheists who would try to argue for some semblance of free will. I'm talking with someone like Dan Dennett, and what Dennett would argue is that, well, there's some level of random chance within, like, it's not all determined, it's not all deterministic. There can be some level of random chance, and like, that doesn't actually account for free will at all either, because that's just randomness. Like, so in an atheistic worldview, there is no free will, and that is mind-boggling to me.
So they're believing that the brain is telling you what to do. And even me thinking that I'm controlling the brain, telling it what to do, is just an illusion that the brain's putting.
Yeah, your the eye that you have is just an illusion. That everything is really just an illusion. Like, Carl Sagan says it best, where he talks about, he's like, I'm not actually like Carl Sagan, like the person. I'm actually just like a sack of meat and water that goes by the name of Carl Sagan. And it's a very dehumanizing way of like it's a very dehumanizing way of like thinking about it. But like, it's the reality of like an atheistic worldview. But like, yeah, this question tore at me for like a solid year of my life.
I guess the one thing that's coming up right now in my mind that an atheist could use is like, well, what about like, if a believer came and was saying, well, yeah, like the love that your mother has for you, like that's
oxytocin.
It's not just like chemicals going off. Like, she chooses to do that, and like that's her free will to be able to love you. And the atheist saying, no, like that's just chemicals. That's just the brain controlling it. Yeah. But so we're the only ones that have free will, humans. I can see the atheist being like, well, what about animals doing the same thing? Like, an animal is caring for the
time-old debate, right? And like, that's actually, you know, a hard thing, because like, it's funny, because like there are these atheistic arguments of like, well, dogs can choose to love you, but like, again, love, if we go with like the classical approach, love is willing the good of the other for the sake of the other. It's this choice of love that I'm making. So it comes from like, you have to go back to like the very bottom up of that argument and like choose what you believe. Like, do you believe in like the classical sense that we do have free will, we can choose to love, we are these beings that are endowed and made in the image and likeness of God, or are we just like animals? You know, and that's all we are. And so like, to go back, you have to go back to the very beginning. You have to go to like either the beginning of either argument and prove it from the ground up. Because a lot of times what we get into with apologetics is people go on to these peripheral tangential arguments, but they don't have but where they're disagreeing is the base of the argument. Does that make sense? Right? So like, if we're arguing about, I don't know, why does God allow suffering? The actual argument is actually taking place on the goodness of God, right? So we have to go back to the actual question, is God good? And if God is good and we can argue for God as goodness, then why does God allow suffering? So like, you have to go back to the base of the argument. So like, even like the whole animal thing, it's like, well, does God actually exist or not? So it goes back to like even that conversation of like, and if God exists, then how did he make man, and how did he make the rest of his creation? Because I think you could argue to some level that like, because actually it's interesting, every living thing has a soul. That's fascinating to me. Every living thing has a soul. So plants have a soul, right? Animals have a soul, right? It's the degree to the soul. So you have a rational soul, you have a nutritive soul, and you have a substantive soul. A nutritive soul is just growing, taking in sunlight, things like that, getting nutrition so that they can grow. A substantive soul, I believe is the term for it, can actually walk and move and interact with this reality, but it's only an irrational soul that has that ability to choose the good and know the good.
Yeah, I guess I'm still hung up on the whole, because now I'm arguing for it a little bit of the animal thing, because how come they can choose to, or I guess, they're not choosing?
Yeah, they can, like, so
we are choosing.
Yeah, so like there can be some level of like affection like that animals have, but it's not love, right? It's just like, the question comes up, do animals suffer? It's like, well, animals can feel pain, but suffering takes on a conscious quality that animals simply do not have. And this is an argument that gets everyone riled up, because everyone's like, but my little puppy Fido, like, stubbed his toe one time and he whimpered for like, no, he was in pain, but did he have the conscious reality of suffering where he could tie himself to the wounds of Christ and be like, God, I'm offering this up for all my puppy friends who have also stubbed it? No, like, it's only something that we as humans, made in the image and likeness of God, have the capacity for.
Yeah, one more thing on this is, what about people that have like a pet lion or whatever? I imagine
Joe Exotic.
Yeah, there you go. But I don't know where I'm going with this, but like the animal is not, the lion is not eating them. It shows, like, I'll see videos of the lion running up to them and they give them like a form of a hug or something.
So Dom, here's what I'm gonna ask you to do then. Tomorrow, go to a zoo, jump in the lion's den, befriend the lion.
But why does their lion?
Because they have familiarity. Because they've raised that lion probably since it was a cub.
Okay,
right?
so the lion's not choosing it then.
No, the lion.
I feel like the lion would still eat them.
It's still,
if they were desperate,
it still could. It's just like, so I'm going to go down the Joe Rogan podcast element, but if you ever watch Joe Rogan and him talking about chimpanzees, like, people try to, like, we'll try to raise chimpanzees, and Joe Rogan's fascinated by this. Like, you can literally go down the rabbit hole later of him talking about chimps and bears, but like chimps especially, like, they'll go down the rabbit hole of like trying to raise a chimp from like the ground up, and it works for a little bit of time, but when the chimp becomes an adult, the chimp can rip your face off. And oftentimes the chimp does rip your face off. And there are multiple instances of chimps ripping people's face off who try to keep them as pets from like their infancy. Like, especially because sometimes they like humanize the chimps too much. So the one person I think I read the story of, like, they were giving this chimp all sorts of drugs, and like the chimp was like smoking weed and things like that. And then the chimp just like literally, while it was high, like ripped her face off.
Oh my gosh.
Jeez.
So that's the moral of the story: is don't give chimps drugs.
Oh, that's what it is. I got it.
I thought it was don't go down the planet of the apes.
Well, I think it's more so that, like, you know, like, human beings have this innate capacity to know, to love God, to have morality, to like all these things, but animals don't. They may have some semblance thereof, but it's not the same capacity.
Yeah, they have like like a reflection, or like a part of they experience a fraction, or no, I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll just go to the next topic. Actually, I think we gotta wrap it up here, because
I'm enjoying it.
Okay.
You can keep going as much as you want.
I'm fascinated with animals.
I know you are.
This whole thing.
Yeah.
How do plants have a soul? Like, I don't understand that part.
He's gonna be on that for the rest of the afternoon. He's gonna be like talking to his plant, like, "Hey, good plant."
You saw when you walked in. There's lots of plants out there, so everyone's got a soul.
Because the idea of a soul isn't necessarily, like, again, that wispy thing inside of you that like animates you, but rather it's like the composite nature of what makes a thing a thing. So like, if
dumb it down even further.
Oh, man.
Talk to me like elementary school kid.
That is elementary. That's how I teach my students.
Okay.
Yeah.
Preschool.
I can't.
My lemon tree out there has a soul.
Yes.
But
because it makes.
Why are you calling it a soul if it's different than the thing that we have?
Because that's what a soul is. It's actually Descartes that kind of ruined the idea of soul and made it into something that it's not. So now that we think of souls, when we think of souls, we think of like Casper the Friendly Ghost. and we think that we should play classical music around plants. But the reality is, a soul is just what makes a living thing what it is. It's like it calls it as it is. So like that soul has a plant, or that plant has a soul because it is nutritive in nature. It grows and it like needs sunlight, and needs water, and it needs oxygen. It needs all of those things. And that's why it is what it is. That dog has a substantive soul because it can move around. It has locomotion. It can, lap up food. It can do all the things that it needs to do to survive and to thrive. And we ourselves have a rational soul because we can know God and love God and choose him above all else. Or we can choose the world, either or.
So the big difference between our soul and the plant's soul is the free will thing?
Well, and we can move. But
Yeah.
We can move? What do you mean move?
Plants
Plants
can't
can
just
move?
like...
Okay, but not like they have they have mobility and legs. I don't think I've ever seen a tree unless we're talking Lord of the Rings. Like
You're talking about like a carnivorous plant that's like it can just
Venus flytrap moves.
Yeah, but
it
like
closes,
it's
only closing.
But they're like not Ents. They're not like from Lord of the Rings, like Fangorn Forest.
No, I'm not 100% sure what you're referencing.
Did you not watch Lord of the Rings?
No,
bro.
Yeah, I know. Brutal. I'm more of an animated movie kind of guy, like Prince of Egypt or something.
Nice. You gotta watch Lord of the Rings though. It's all Christian allegory.
Okay.
I heard that before.
Yeah.
Let's watch it.
Yeah. Frodo.
We're gonna need a long time because those are
like
long.
9 hours of total time.
Okay. Movie marathon date.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but so the Venus flytrap though, you're telling me they move?
Yes,
but they only move because you're doing something to them.
Yeah,
like they're reacting.
So they're responding.
They're reacting exactly how an atheist says that we're reacting. Is when you touch the little things inside the antennas in the Venus flytrap, then it moves.
They're responding to
and
stimuli.
It's not making the decision.
Yeah, they're responding to stimuli. Yes,
it's coming full circle.
He's connecting the dots. He's connecting the dots.
Okay, that makes so much more sense. We just got to talk in Venus flytrap terms. I don't know. I feel like that
come off the rails a little bit.
No, we should just end it here. I appreciate you coming on the show.
All right. Thank you.